Hey everyone, welcome to a Sales Hacker Live event. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. We have got a very cool person here today. I can't wait for you to meet him in just a moment. He's going to be talking to you about buyer feedback loops, what they are, why they matter, how it benefits buyers and sellers. So it's going to be really interesting, and we want this to be a back and forth conversation between John and you. So when you have questions, you can either put them in the Q&A box, and John will pull them in as he goes, or you can use the raise your hand button. We'll promote you to panelist, and you can ask your question and interact with John live. So totally up to you. No pressure if you don't want to get on the stage, but we absolutely want your questions and want your interaction. So for those of you just joining, please use the Q&A box, ask John questions throughout the presentation, or raise your hand and we'll bring you up to ask your question live. So we've still got people rolling in. So while we're waiting for some more people to come in, let's go ahead and get the chat started. So make sure you're set to panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see you, and go ahead and introduce yourself. Drop your LinkedIn link if you want. And to kick off the conversation, we do have a question for you. So tell us in the chat who your typical buyer is. Who do you typically sell to? So go ahead, open your chat, set to panelists and attendees, and tell us who your typical buyer is, who you typically sell to. And without further ado, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, tell us about what we're talking about today, and I'll let you take it from here. Thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today.
That was a brilliant opening, Sam. The most impressive I've ever heard. So kudos to you. Michael, I'm the Director of VPs, Director of Marketing at Christian K-12 Schools. Awesome. I'll get started in 2 seconds. The one thing I'll share with the audience before I dive into it is I told Sam, I so want to find somebody who comes on and says they sell to circus clowns. That is my dream answer, because I want to meet that person. There is somebody that sells to that audience. Please join one of these meetings. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about the buyer perspective and buyer feedback loops. And I know when I promoted this through my LinkedIn feed anyway, I used the comparison of Schrodinger's cat. I don't know how many of you went to school to study theoretical physics. Hopefully none of you, because I went to school as an engineer and I did well in physics. But I'm still going to do this comparison for a minute because it's a really valid and interesting way of thinking about it. So a theoretical physicist alive around the same time as Einstein came up with the theory of Schrodinger's cat. And basically the thought experiment went along these lines. He determined or thought about a cat put into a box with a piece of radioactive material and a Geiger counter. And the way the thought experiment went was that if the radioactive material decayed, basically let off a little radiation, that what would end up happening is the Geiger counter would beep and it would release poison, killing the cat. And as he went through this thought experiment, he went along the lines and concluded that based upon physics, based upon relativity and all of the knowledge of quantum physics at the time, that the cat was logically both alive and dead because we couldn't tell until you opened up the box. Now, come on. You've never went to a sales hacker presentation where you started off by talking about theoretical physics. The reason I mention this example is it reminds me so much of what most of our deals operate like. We talk to a buyer. We think that everything is going amazingly well. But until we really open up the box and understand what's happening behind the scenes beyond simply the buyer, who in this case, let's say, is the box, we have no clue if the CFO in the corner is miserable, if they're excited. We just don't know until we open up the box. And that's the thinking behind the buyer feedback loops. That's also the thinking about taking a buyer perspective. Now, that was interesting. I know everybody, Sam, is like jumping up and down. They're going back to their college physics classes. This is great. Now, we think we're doing so much better. Now, Sam, you're in marketing, right? She's going to shake her head. And anybody, I'm going to say jump up on stage and let's communicate and chat and have some interactive conversation if you have some thoughts as we go forward. But we think we're doing a much better job of listening to our buyers. We have ABM, and ABM is out there telling us what? That somebody's out there searching for keywords that we think represent buyer intent. We really don't know, though, are they similar to that cat in the box where we hear scratching and they're actually on their dying breath, or are they scratching because they want to get the hell out of the box? We don't know until we open the box. We try to use value-based selling instead of selling features and functions over and over again. And we think that we're putting ourselves into the mindset of our buyers, when in reality, most of us, because of the very nature of the way that we think and we operate, we're really just trying to find ways to overcome objectives, to set landmines and traps for our competitors. We're really trying to talk value, but we're really trying to close the deal. And that's okay. That's part of how we operate. But it's part of the reason that quota attainment still hovers around 50%. It's part of the reason that forecast accuracy is in the toilet, and you're better off going to Vegas and placing a bet on a sports team than actually getting your forecast right. We're just not doing things well. Now, customer success, we try to put in SaaS businesses and others. We have the role of customer success. The beauty of customer success is that they're out there actually listening to, talking to customers, trying to understand how successful they're being with our products. It's an attempt at listening better to our customers. And we do, when we train customer success well, help identify additional upsell and cross-sell opportunities. We find opportunities to actually reduce churn rates because we're actually training them to listen better. So it's a good step, but it's not all the way there. Now, I really dove into theoretical physics, rather than introducing myself. And I probably should stay in theoretical physics because it's much more interesting than who I am. I'm John. I go by the name of the Collaborator, and I'm founder of Trust Enablement. Trust Enablement, for those of you that aren't aware of who and what we are, is the global leading voice for enablement information on the web. And I'll refine it a little bit more. That's not run by a vendor and is open and public. And what we try to do is we go out there and we gather through conversation and interviews the very best information of what's actually working on the planet, sharing what's working, what's not working, and so on and so forth. And in addition to that, I do a lot of strategic consulting and other activities as well, but that's neither here nor there. You're not here to hear about me. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to dive into a little bit the concept of the buyer feedback loops. And we're going to tie back to theoretical physics, because I like it so much, the idea of taking the buyer perspective to improve how we sell and how we actually do a much better job of becoming predictable, both in achieving forecasts, but in hitting better win rates, achieving quota, and so on and so forth. Now, I have to take 2 seconds before I dive on to the next slide and congratulate Doug. Doug, you made my day. The fact that you sold insurance, used to be an insurance worker, comp premium auditor, and circus clowns was the highest premium level. So 10 points to Doug for bringing up circus clowns. You are now my favorite person on this webinar. So let's talk about buyer feedback loops and taking the buyer perspective and talk about why did we miss this. And I'm going to bring up another theoretical physicist, a man named Albert Einstein. And I'm not going to make you read this, but Einstein lived about the same time as Schrodinger. And actually they were peers, and they were good friends until they had a falling out. Egos got in the way of their friendship. But basically, Einstein had this thought experiment as well. And it again applies to buying, so I hope you'll give me a little bit of leeway. So Einstein's thought experiment went along these lines. Picture a person, a man or a woman, sitting on a train going by, and they're simply throwing a ball up in the air. And let's for a second pretend that person sitting on the train is your average seller. If you ask them about how that ball is moving, they'll say that the ball is simply moving up and down. not moving side to side, forward or backward. It's simply moving up and down. Now let's take the perspective of the person outside of the train, watching the train go by, and pretend for a moment that that person is our buyer. That buyer, simply focusing on the ball, sees something very different from what our seller, the person on the train, is seeing. They're seeing that ball moving in one direction. They have a very different perspective of what's happening as a result of that simple train experiment. And I maintain for you and for everybody listening, that the buyer perspective and the seller perspective, those two different viewpoints, the person on the train and the person outside of the train watching it go by, are both equally valid. What we've missed through the last 100 or so years of selling, if not longer, is we typically focus on our own perspective. Even when we claim that we're being buyer-centric, which I think is a poor choice of word and a poor approach, but I'll write more about that later, we're actually taking the perspective of ours. How do we manipulate the scenario so that we convince the buyer we're the best choice? So let's dive into this a little bit more and talk about how our views of the world haven't really changed a lot, and then we'll talk about buyer feedback loops and how the world changes when we take the buyer perspective. Now, for a long time, decade, 2 decades, maybe 3, we've had this concept of enablement, sales enablement, and we've taken this and we've tried to arm our sellers to be as effective as possible in the conversations that they have with the buyers. Initially, when we started standing up enablement, we looked at it and primarily took the perspective of when a customer or potential buyer enters the sales funnel, so when they enter our field of view, how can we best control the conversation, walk them through our sales funnel, our sales cycle? Remember, you'll notice I'm using the word "our" a lot. It's our perspective, to move them through the point of closed won and maximize the number of people we win through that deal funnel. Again, not a bad idea, but honestly, as much as I'm an advocate for enablement, and hell, my life is focused on making enablement successful, the impact on win rates, the impact on being able to forecast accurately, the impact on sales efficiency and productivity have been negligible. With the exception of maybe 30% of enablement, where it's done strategically and done very, very well in an outcome-based model, it really hasn't made a major impact. So we took a step forward, and over the last, 2 or 3 years, we talked more and more about revenue enablement. Now, revenue enablement, we took a little broader picture. We broadened our perspective of what's happening in the market. So instead of simply waiting for buyers to enter our sales funnel, we said, let's take a step back. When we start to recognize potential buyers that are demonstrating intent, ABM, let's start tracking and messaging them and delivering to them the information they need to know to solve their problems with us, why we're the best solution. We then guide them through the sales process, and we've begun to recognize the importance of the buyer journey as opposed to the seller journey. So we've taken an attempt to look behind or outside of that train as it's going by, or in the case of Schrodinger, trying to peek inside the box a little bit. But we really haven't dramatically changed it. But we've guided them through the sales process. And thanks to the introduction of customer success, we now also attempt to take them when they're customers through a successful use of our products to solve their problems. We're improving. But we're still really taking a business seller-centric view first. Now, I maintain that there's been this concept of buying enablement or buyer enablement, and I think it's kind of the wrong words to use because we're still trying to enable them to buy our stuff as quickly as possible. And ultimately, that's our goal, is to sell as much stuff as possible. Let's be honest, we all make a living selling us, our services, our products, but we're doing it in a way that really, if you look at the outcomes, forecast accuracy, quota attainment, win rates, it hasn't changed. I maintain that we need to flip our perspective, and instead of blindly staring at that box containing the cat. We need to open up the box and get inside of it. We need to get outside of the train and have conversations so that we're not only looking at the deal and the opportunities from our perspective, but we also need to better understand it from our customer perspective. And what I'm going to try to do over the next little bit is walk you through different opportunities for feedback loops, different opportunities to take the buyer perspective into account, to really take it into account. And what I encourage everybody on this phone call to do, on this webinar to do, is to jump online with me, to show your beautiful faces, and say, John, you're full of crap, whenever you want to. Ideally, you actually applaud me and just say, this is a wonderful idea. But Sam's already done that, and my ego honestly couldn't take anymore. So let's take a minute and start talking about how do we shift our gears, not to replace our seller perspective. We still need to make money. We want to improve our business outcomes, not reduce them, but to incorporate the buyer perspective in different buyer feedback loops. So let me ask you this, and I'll ask you, and I'll take a couple of seconds to listen to you. Throw into the chat, how many of you are training your sellers or yourselves to deal with objections, to set traps for your competition? Versus how many of you are truly teaching your sellers how to have a consultative style conversation with your customers that for a moment completely ignores what you sell, what your customers sell, and simply focus upon, again, what is the problem that your customer is trying to solve, your buyer is trying to solve. And I made that as complicated as possible, Sam, because I wanted to make sure nobody would answer because they didn't have a freaking clue what I was asking. Isaac says, he'd like to think he's in the second group. I think a lot of us are actually trying to improve there, but it's also really hard. And one of the reasons I bring this up is we do an amazing job, I think, in many businesses. And thank you, Michael. Thank you, Isaac. I think we do an incredible job of trying to bring in unique perspectives to our customers. We have our sales kickoff meetings, and what do? We try to bring in, I said to our sellers, I should have said, we try to bring in some of our biggest customers. We try to bring in analysts and others who can talk intelligently about our marketplace. Customers that have actually bought from us, who can talk to us about why they bought from us. But many times, at least in my observation, and I hope that many of you are doing better, a lot of times we guide those conversations, at least during sales kickoffs, to listening to, oh, here's what can go wrong with the deal. Here's where we struggled with the purchasing department and how we overcame that challenge. We rarely use those meetings and conversations to say, how should we work with this customer? What could we have asked you to uncover? What kind of things were happening within the business, within the buying process internally that we should have been aware of? Now, Doug, like that, Doug. We need to take the opportunity not simply to bring in our customers and analysts, but I would challenge us all to look at partners of ours. If we have consultative services, global services that we offer, bring in those teams and have them also teach our customers, our sellers, I keep doing the wrong word, our sellers how to have those types of wide open discovery questions. And I'll give you, you threw me way off, Doug. I'm going to come back and hunt you down and yell at you for that later. How many of us have those, take that opportunity? And I'll give you a great example of a company I worked at in the past. Doesn't matter the name. But we sold a customer of ours this amazing service. We said we were going to build X and Y and Z. And 6 months went by, 9 months went by, and the customer was growing more and more frustrated. Now, the seller didn't do anything wrong in terms of winning the deal using the models we had set forth. But when I went down and I sat with the customer and I pulled together the entire set of stakeholders on the project from the customer side only. I left the rest of our business out. And I sat down and simply walked them through what their pain points were, what were they trying to accomplish, and discovered, again, nobody's fault, that what we had thought we were trying to solve, or rather, we knew what we thought we were trying to solve, but what we thought we had agreed to do to solve it was nowhere near in line with what the customer expected. So as a result of not putting together through that initial solutioning conversations a clear picture of the solution, we were going off in this direction. And we risked losing a multi-$100,000 customer simply because we purely approached this from our perspective. We sell our products, we set them up this way, we're going to solve your problems that way. Where we actually were able to upsell a large amount of services, extend the customer through a multi-year deal by taking a more consultative approach and listening to them. So part of the challenge here with solutioning strategies is stepping back and learning to become a consultant so that you can actually uncover what each of the stakeholders in the buying process are looking for. Revolutionary, I know, it's really not. People that do it are doing really well. People that don't. Buying plans. Now, a lot of us in theory do a really good job of defining closing plans or mutual action plans as we move along with our customers. But again, these mutual action plans purely focus, they're usually oftentimes later in the deal, and they're purely focused in many, many cases, not all, and I'll ask the audience for their feedback on this too. First of, how many of you are using mutual action plans with every deal that you put out there? Or at least the majority. And what I see is most people don't use these plans, and they're a great opportunity, again, to bring the buyer side perspective into the sales conversation. And when done well, they actually have been demonstrated to increase win rates. Now, the mutual action plans and the close plans, great call out, Doug. Sometimes agreed upon next steps. Michael, I wouldn't call it agreed upon next steps as a full mutual action plan. When I talk about a mutual action plan, it's really about, we're at this point in the conversation, what do I on the buying side, what are the obstacles I need to go through? So it's about bringing visibility into the internal buying processes. Who needs to be included in the buying processes? What are they looking for? And agreeing what role each side of this conversation, the buying and the seller, will do what. And a lot of times what these mutual action plans uncover, and it shouldn't be surprising to any of us that have actually bought software at an enterprise level, well, a lot of times what they uncover is that the buyer, the person you're selling to, has forgotten 2 or 3 people that should be included in the conversation. A lot of time, a good example, I'm going to bring in a new sales tool. And I think I need to include IT for a security audit. I need my CFO. I might need a couple other people to get buy-in. But what they don't realize is that there's a special internal IT group that doesn't care about security, but that's actually built a workaround to deal with the solution you're putting in place. And by bringing in your solution, you're actually going to require them to change their focus or lay off staff, or at least repurpose staff, because you're actually solving the problem that they're in place to solve. So these mutual action plans are about understanding and identifying all the stakeholders, all of the ramifications of solving this problem on both sides. And again, from the buying side, you're trying to think through all of that. On the selling side, you should be, I shouldn't say you should be, most successful sales teams today, surely selling at the enterprise level, are operating as a selling team. It's not one superstar AE out there doing it all. They're working with kick-ass sales engineers or pre-sales engineers. They're including internal teams and stakeholders. They might be bringing in an executive, have an executive level conversation when the deal moves up to that level. It's a team, so it's also about identifying and replicating that plan over and over again. Again, it's about modeling successful behaviors that have gotten you through and helped you win other deals. So what you need to do, what I argue and contend you need to do, and I appreciate the honesty, Michael and Doug and others, that We don't do it all the time, but in a well-functioning machine, in a better functioning machine that does better at hitting our quotas, that does better at being predictable and at nailing our forecasts, we're going to replicate these frameworks of what success looks like. Part of that is the mutual action plan, bringing it into the conversation and using it over and over again. Now, deal rooms is kind of a hot new concept from an analyst standpoint. Analysts are all hot about the technology of deal rooms, but I would argue that the deal room concept isn't anything really new. Many people have used, and please don't get sick to your stomach, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody. People have used SharePoint. Back in the day, I worked on Lotus Notes. I'm that old that I actually worked on Lotus Notes when it was a really cool product. They use collaboration tools to bring people together to actually put into practice these mutual action plans, these cooperative selling engagements, and create results. The thing that I want you to consider from a deal room perspective is we instantly, when we use deal rooms as sellers, as businesses, we're often using deal rooms from a perspective of trying to give ourselves the advantage. Of course we are. We want to win the deal. We want to beat the competitor. But our buyers are struggling because they're using, if we have one set up, our deal room. They're using our competitor's deal room. They're using the other competitor's deal room. And our buyers are flustered because they have to replicate the work in multiple places. They have to maintain these different silos. Think about and put into action, if possible, because it will give you an advantage that I'll talk about in a moment, a more open environment. Set up a deal room and invite your competitors into it if they're involved in the deal. Don't invite somebody who's not involved in the deal, of course. But if you're selling to Sales Hacker, hey, Sam, I'm going to sell you something here today. And you're talking to me and you're talking to 2 or 3 other people. Great. Why shouldn't I set up, I'm not going to insult any technology, a Lotus Notes product site, which if you're using Lotus Notes, we should talk because you still have problems. That's about 40-year-old technology. But set up a site, SharePoint, whatever you're using, and allow all of your competitors to share information with your buyers. That level of transparency to the buyer, you will be recognized as the person enabling easing of the conversation. And there's research out there that's somewhat related to this, that the seller that brings content and information at every buyer step in the process is far more likely to win the deal than the competitors that miss steps in the process. So you, by taking ownership of the deal, by providing content and making it easy for your buyer to buy, you are actually going to put yourself in the best position to win the deal. I'm simply advocating bring your competitors in. If they're involved in the deal, bring them in. But you set the rules of the game, you set the required transparency, and do it all from the perspective of making your buyer's life easier. Now, Michael and Doug and anybody else, Isaac, if you're still there, anybody else who wants to weigh in, do you think I'm a little crazy there, or do you think that would actually help you? Feel free to throw your thought in there. But I'll tell you that I've seen involving competitors work. They're always going to be involved, and they're always going to be saying things you're not aware of. When you are able to be aware of them, you're going to actually be more successful. Michael, I know I set you up for an unfair thing. You couldn't possibly say, John, you're ridiculous. In the way that it would be essentially doing the work for my buyer. Exactly. You would be helping your buyer. My competes don't do. They understand what my competes don't do. Yeah, exactly. You have mag cards older than my, oh, geez. I have a Lotus original shrink wrap boxes, Doug. So I've got Lotus Symphony and Lotus 1, 2, 3 and shrink wrap. I'll show those another time. Anyway, I'm talking too long. Let me move ahead. Next stage, win-loss analysis. Look, win-loss analysis is as old as possible, but I rarely see companies using this simple tool consistently. And I rarely see this tool used as a solution for both deals you've won and deals you've lost, to go back and learn from your buyers. Now, I'll be honest with you. No seller truly wants you calling up the prospect that they just lost to. They're embarrassed. Maybe they did something wrong. Maybe they didn't do anything wrong, but they don't want to necessarily get their ego beat up. It isn't about beating up the seller. It's purely about learning. If you set up a win-loss process where you include every member of your sales team, and you at least reach out to the lead, the champion, the lead stakeholder at the prospect site that you are working with, and ask them if they'd be willing to have a conversation, you're going to learn a lot. Now, 50-60% of them are probably going to ignore you. They will, and because you're going to need to be clear that you're not trying to reopen the sale. You're not trying to get them to reconsider their decision. You simply want to learn from them. But the 30 or 40%, smaller or larger, that you are able to talk to will teach you so much more than you will learn from any gong recording, chorus recording, or software of choice, or any other tool that you use. Because what I've found is they will tell you, what did you say that sent them off in the wrong direction? Maybe you shared with them a piece of marketing material that they misinterpreted. Maybe your competitor actually explained to them that you couldn't do X. You only do Y. And they believed it and never questioned it, and you never thought about raising it because you figured it was table stakes as a capability or solution. Whatever you learn, there's almost no other way to learn it than actually setting down without biography. Oh, 100%, Javier. And that's a good point. That was the second point that I'll touch upon. Doing those postmortems, those win-loss analysis, purely with your internal team, they're valuable. In my last role, we did a lot of them. They're valuable, but you only hear that one perspective. You're talking to the person sitting on the train, tossing the ball up in the air. And to them, that ball is simply moving up and down. They used the materials you provided to them. They ran the discovery perfectly. And they used your sales methodology and entered everything into the CRM system exactly the way you wanted to. Now, some sellers, and certainly some more mature sellers, will acknowledge, and I've found great insight from this as well, where they took missteps or where they felt the deal went off track. And you can learn from that. You can also learn where your sales teams, your pre-sales teams, or others that were involved in the deal weren't properly prepared. There was a training opportunity. We need to get some training out there on this now. Or they needed content about X or Y or Z. You will learn some of that stuff, but I'll tell you the majority of the value from the win-loss analysis comes from having conversations with your prospects. So I would go so far as to say every single deal, and some of us, if you're selling at a large enough volume, you won't be able to do this, but your goal should be every deal, have a win-loss analysis, even if it's simply having your team have a 15-minute conversation, 30-minute or an hour, walking through the deal. And reach out to every single buyer with permission of the seller, with permission of the CRO and all of that, being clear that you're not trying to reopen their eyes on the deal, and walk through the deal with a standard set of questions that, again, are not motivated by understanding and getting them to second guess their decisions, but that are really motivated from taking the buyer perspective and understanding what they felt, what they saw, what they heard, and then use that to improve the next time around. It's critical, and I can't say it enough. Now, the last thing I'll touch upon here is the measuring of outcomes. And agree, Doug, it takes guts to do it, but it's a valuable approach. Actually, good question before I move on. Isaac asked a really wonderful question. Would you recommend this be done by a non-salesperson? I'm going to try to be polite. Hell yeah! Don't put a salesperson in front of the prospect who rejected you or that accepted you. You don't want that customer that you won or lost to feel like this is simply another sales conversation. In my opinion, the best person to put in front of them, maybe your customer success team, maybe your sales enablement organization. An even better scenario is if you sell a solution that people in your business might actually use. So let's say you sell to CROs. Have your CRO talk to them. That's not going to happen at scale, I know. But the idea being, try to get somebody who can really set in their shoes, understand and empathize from their perspective, and not have an ounce of motivation to sell, cross-sell, upsell, extend the deal, do any of that kind of nonsense. It's purely a learning opportunity. The other thing I'll mention because you reminded me of it, Isaac, and I apologize that I didn't think of it, is what do you do with these win-loss analysis? What do you do with the buying plans and the solutioning strategies and all the other stuff that we talked about? The reality is, too often what I see happening is they end up on somebody's desktop or they end up in some SharePoint site, never to be revisited again. What you need to do with the win-loss analysis, especially with the win-loss analysis, is put them in whatever sales asset management system you're using, or in your CRM system, or in some system that's tied to your deals, whereby you go back every quarter. I don't know the size and scale of your business. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's monthly, depending on the number of opportunities you work. Maybe it's twice a year. You have to figure out what works for you. But you actually go back through those win-loss analysis, because the fundamental piece that should come out of those win-loss analysis are a set of steps and conclusions for how you can improve. So not only do you want to, at the time that you do the win-loss analysis, take those steps and feed those into some formal strategy for continuous improvement, but you want to review those on a, again, quarterly, monthly, twice a year, whatever it is, basis, and make sure that you've incorporated those changes into your systems. And you want to do it in a way that, again, tying it back to measuring outcomes. Let's put our hands up for a second and acknowledge something. As sales professionals, as go-to-market teams, we are truly, very few of us are any better than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in terms of delivering positive, measurable outcomes on a consistent basis. Yes, all of our teams have that A player that knocks it out of the park every single time. And you know what? They're going to knock it out of the park all the time because they're really good at what they do. They found the right opportunity where they really click with the types of buyers you're working with. Great. But as organizations, and I'm talking about include enablement, include operations, include ABM, include every cool hack, every cool fad that's come along, we still only hit quota about 50% of the time. Now, you could argue that that happens as a result of the fact that sales managers don't actually understand how to do quota, how to set quota, and our leaders don't. But again, that's an education thing. We can teach and learn to be better. We don't understand how to forecast. That's tied back to setting quotas in the first place. We don't understand how to discover and identify the likelihood of closing our deals as individual sellers. And customer success teams, more often than not, going back to that side of the equation, unfortunately often fail to understand if customers are going to renew as well. We're simply not training, educating, learning, improving on how to do better at reading these signals from our purely seller side of the perspective. We are Schrodinger, staring at the box and flipping a coin, hoping that we make the right prediction more often than not. And that's why quota attainment runs about 50%. We're flipping a coin, and sometimes we get lucky, and sometimes we don't. So what we need to do with all of these pieces, in my opinion, and in the opinion of where I see it works best, is try not to boil the ocean. Try not to take each and every one of these feedback loops. Try not to put ourselves in the buyer perspective at every stage of the deal right away. Try to get really good at one of them. And do the win-loss analysis really well for 6 months, including reaching out to prospects, customers you've won and lost, bringing in information, and try to make those improvements. And take an honest assessment, if your deal length fits within that time frame, of how are you actually improving in terms of seller efficiency, productivity, forecast accuracy, win rates. How have you actually improved? And I know some of us deal, I don't know what your individual sales cycles are like. Some of us deal with sales cycles that are 9, 12 months long, longer. Some of us deal with sales cycles that are a month long. Factor that in, but do one thing and get damn good at that one thing, measuring the level of improvement as well as the level of adoption that you're putting in place until you can determine if you've got it right. So let's take the win-loss analysis, and I'll beat the dead horse, Sam, because I like to beat the dead horse. Let's say you're going to do the win-loss analysis. You're just going to focus there. Set an adoption target. In other words, let's say you do 10 deals a month. What percentage of deals do we have to do a win-loss analysis of? 70%. So we're going to do 70%. We're going to do a win-loss analysis for 70% of the deals we work this month. And let's say our deal lengths run a month long. We're going to do them for 6 months. And based upon a baseline that we set at the beginning of this, of our win-loss analysis, our sales productivity and efficiency, forecast accuracy, how has this changed at the end of 6 months? If at the end of that 6 months, you're no better than you were, you have decisions to make. A, perhaps you're not doing the win-loss analysis in an impactful way. Maybe you're not actually taking the lessons learned and weaving them back in. Get to the point where you're actually seeing a measurable bump in those key revenue metrics that people care about, not simply on the artificial metrics of how many deals am I working, how many phone calls did I make, who impacted the business. And when you nail that, then move on to the next one. Most of us don't have unlimited resources. You're going to fail if you try to bite it all off at once. But pick one, nail it, and then move on. Let me ask you this before I move on from here. Are there any cool things, and feel free to either jump onto the camera or not, feel free to throw it into the chat or not. Are there any things that you're doing in your business that you're like, crap, John, well, I'm a hell of a lot smarter than you are right now. We're actually taking the buyer perspective and getting feedback in this way. Are there any neat ideas that people are using out there? A, selfishly, I want to learn and borrow the ideas, but also I want to make sure everybody here on the call actually has a chance to learn from each other. So any other cool concepts that people have tried, had luck with or not, to really get feedback from the buyers through the entire journey, or your customers. And I'm going to sit there for 2 seconds. I'm going to play the Jeopardy music. I'm going to pretend. Too many LinkedIn surveying now happening. Amen. Amen. Stop barraging your customers with surveys. I make the same mistake. I'm not saying I'm any better than it. But people get so overwhelmed and fatigued from, I got to fill out another survey. And more often than not, they don't know what your true intention is, which is why it's so much more important to try to do it face to face, either through a web, a video type interface like this, or truly face to face and setting down. So many people look at those surveys and either ignore them, or they're like, hey, you know what, I like Sam. I don't want to say that the buying experience sucked, so I'm just going to say Sam did great. It just didn't work out. So a lot of times when you do those random surveys, or well thought through surveys even, it doesn't work out. Michael says, the challenge to get buyer feedback on why they chose another option. It can be. Look, it can be really hard, but the answer is not to say it's too hard to get the right answer, so I'm not going to ask them. The right answer, in his opinion, Michael, is you need to ask the question. You need to say, look, I'm not trying to learn anything unfair from an advantage about our competitors. I just want to learn how I can do a better job. Heck, I want to learn how our company can do a better job for other people like you. We know we lost this deal to you. That's okay. We want you to be super successful. We just want to learn how we can improve. Some customers, some people aren't going to answer the question. Some people will honestly, if they feel like you're being sincere in wanting to understand and learn and improve, will honestly take the time to provide the feedback. Again, none of this is 100% success, so I don't want to pretend it is, but that's an approach that I take. You just have to be honest with people. I don't control if they answer, so we'll celebrate when they do. Amen. Now, Isaac put a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I just want to jump to those first. Going back to the inviting competitors conversation, how many times do you find you're able to invite your competitors into a call before they stop agreeing to join your call? The reality is, I'm not going to invite my competitor in. I'm asking the buyer to invite the competitor in. I want the buyer to set a level playing field, and I want to help them understand why it benefits them. Look, if we're all providing you answers in one place, you're not going to be bullshitted by one of us into believing something that's not true. You're going to get the right information with transparency. So look, I'm going to bring in all the competitors together, and we're going to use this solution or that solution. Ideally, it's yours and you control it, but who cares? If the customer can do it, or you can provide a solution for them to do it, better. I mean, that still works. You want them to make it happen and basically say, look, this is how we want to do business. And when you convince the buyer that they're best served by having a transparent buying experience, they're going to want to bring in your competitors. And what's more, the competitors that don't want to participate, they will often be left out. Now, not everybody's going to buy into this. Not every customer is going to buy into this. Not every prospect's going to buy into this. That's just the reality. There's no silver bullets here. I find that when you find the right buyer who buys into the idea that a level playing field, a transparent sales and buying experience, where everybody is putting their cards on the table, allows them to make the best decision possible, they want that. Now, if you are in the deal and you're unable to deliver on their needs because you're simply not able to deliver on their needs, you shouldn't have won that deal in the first place. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's won far too many deals that I shouldn't have, it costs you too damn much on the flip side to have a customer you shouldn't have won in the first place. How many deals have I seen won where you agreed to do X and Y and Z, and guess what? It cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. You lost the opportunity to serve the rest of your customers, and ultimately you lost the customer anyway. So it's really beneficial. Again, it's not going to be 100%. Sometimes your competitors won't want to play, and guess what? If your buyer's the one inviting them in, good that your competitors don't want to play. Get them out there. Be that transparent seller that wants to be in it for your buyer. Take their perspective. How have you encouraged your managers, when you have managers above you, to educate themselves on more modern sales approaches? Sometimes well, sometimes poorly. Look, the reality is, I'm not a big believer in any model over another. If you use DISC or any other sort of mental model in terms of understanding how people think, I have worked for managers that have been incredibly open-minded, who have wanted to look at the research out there, who have wanted to test new ideas. And when you have that open-minded manager, they're going to give it a try. You're going to have to give them some reasons. You're going to have to make the case, and you're going to have to do it with lower value customers first, most likely, because they're not going to want to take the big risk, nor should they. But when you find that open manager who's willing to take the risk, who's willing to make the investment, you're going to learn together and you're going to find some of these ideas working really well for you. But I've also worked for people who have one perspective. I'm open-minded and I want any idea as long as it agrees with my idea. And those managers, I've never had any consistent success in getting them to adopt a new approach, certainly not one as brave as this. There's a lot of people that claim this level of bravery who frankly don't have it. And in that case, you're not going to be successful encouraging them to take this approach. That's the reality, in my opinion. Now, I would love to have someone on this call say, John, I actually did it this way and had success 100 times out of 100. I don't think that scenario happens unless you are an expert hypnotist and can convince every single manager of yours that it's the best idea ever. In all reality, none of this is going to work 100% of the time. You need to figure out what's going to work best for your business, where your CRO and your leadership is willing to take those risks and test new ideas. Heck, if you look at ABM a few years back, ABM was a brand new approach. People were hesitant to try it. Now everybody's doing it, and if you're not one of the cool kids. The sad reality is, and I mean no disrespect to anybody delivering ABM solutions, it only works if you do it 100% right. Too many people take these little half steps, whether we talk about ABM or any of these approaches even, and they wonder why it's not working. I see a lot of people do win-loss analysis, for example, and they're surprised that the win-loss analysis isn't leading to any improvements in the business. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they're only talking to their internal teams. What they learn from them get buried in some file somewhere, and they never implement the changes. So they fail to do it all the way through. Any idea is a great one in theory. You need to do it all the way through, though, to get the results. So I don't know. I went a little bit off track there, Isaac. My apologies for that as well. But I haven't, in all honesty, found a 100% answer for convincing the manager of anything. I'd be lying if I'd said I did. I've been married for 30 years. My wife is my favorite manager in the world. I convince her 50% of the time. So let's just say that. That's the reality, and I don't do any better in the business side. Bogdan raised his hand. I hope I didn't destroy your name. What was your question, Bogdan? Or were you just saying you agree? Oh, Bogdan's coming on. Hey, Sam, we got our first guinea pig.
Woohoo, this is awesome. Bogdan, I am making it so that you can come on camera if you want. That is promote you to panelist, and feel free to jump on if you'd like.
Bogdan, what do you got, my friend? Feel free to just use the audio or the video or whatever you want.
Absolutely. Definitely feel free to put it in the Q&A or in the chat.
Anything you're comfortable with. While we wait for Bogdan to either come onto the audio or video or throw it in the chat, I'll just close out the last couple of slides here. Look, hopefully you're leaving this conversation feeling like, geez, John, these are some good ideas. I don't know how they're going to work in my business. And the reality is, I've already summed it up. You're going to have to pick and choose. You're not going to be able to boil the ocean. You're going to have to pick and test and make progress, but do it all with the eye towards one change, measure results, and continue to improve. And if you do that, you're going to get more buy-in and support for other ideas along these lines, and you'll get support for going further. Your buyers own the buying process. Gone are the days where we trick them into buying. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I still see, sadly, buyers getting tricked into buying a product that they thought did X and Y and Z, only to learn it doesn't. That doesn't help us. We live in an economy where people can tell how good or bad you are to work with. Your reputation is everything. We live in an economy where people often buy SaaS software. That means they can drop you anytime they want to. It may be painful for certain types of solutions and others. You need to get your heads out of whatever body part they're currently into and recognize that the people that fully embrace your buyers and their perspective are really going to be the long-term winners here. It's going to be some short-term pain though. Your sellers, if you do any of these solutions, the sellers are going to become much more educated, much more prepared than they ever were before. If you are able to get and have conversations with prospects and customers, wins and losses, if you're able to get competitors brought into deal rooms, even occasionally, you're going to learn a hell of a lot more about your competitors than you're going to read on their websites. You're going to learn more about who was involved with buying your products and your customers. And if you listen, learn, and incorporate the changes that come as a result of those conversations, you'll get better at messaging each and every participant in those buying committees. You will. But if you do it halfway or less, don't waste your time. You're not going to learn anything if you're not going to listen, learn, and incorporate the changes. You'll simply be wasting your time. But if you do this, your sellers also get better and better and better. And the company overall will win. Now, again, we talked about the fear factor. Some managers will not embrace this, will not embrace any of these ideas. Oh well, some will, and some will want to move slow. But those companies that start to implement a more buyer-focused perspective, not implement a full buyer perspective, but incorporate the buyer perspective in their journey, who actually take the time to incorporate these feedback loops to lead them into change in how you go to market, will see improved forecast accuracy, which I don't care if you're a public or a private company, your board, your shareholders, wherever they are, want to know that you can actually predictably predict your forecast and set your forecast. That's how they decide how much money to invest in you. That's how they decide where to invest your money in the company. They want to know that you can drive effective efficiency and productivity in your sales, marketing, and customer success spend. And you will get better at that if you incorporate these feedback loops. And also, and I touched upon this before, but it's good for the company. The more you understand your competitors, and yes, the more they understand you, you move to a point where actually you are able to break away the downward funnel of being commoditized. Today, when I look at a lot of the market segments that sellers buy into, all of the products look and sound the same. Now, you could argue that for the vendors, this is a wonderful thing. I can go in, I can say anything and do anything, and I can charge a lot of money and win. That will happen in the short term. However, every product, every company reaches a state of commoditization eventually. Until you continue to find your next blue ocean that you can dive into, that's simply a reality of market economics and dynamics. So you need to better differentiate, and this will allow you, your competitors do it, and for you to get better at winning the customers you're actually prepared to serve and win, and grow a product and set of solutions and services that can win with who you're trying to win against. So this is a value add all the way around. So anyway, I'll stop there, Sam. I feel like, oh crap, I felt like that was 10 minutes. Diarrhea of the mouth. I apologize. Nobody wants to hear that. Sam, what's up?
That was incredible. If we have a moment, it looks like we had one more question, which was, have you ever set up a deal room with competitors that has resulted in you losing the deal?
Yes, I have set up a conversation. I'll call it a deal room. It was more of a SharePoint type setup, not a traditional deal room as you would expect from some of the modern solutions, where we went in, we thought we could win the deal, and frankly, the competitors outplayed us. Yeah. I'll argue, though, the following, and in the scenario that I'm talking about, we shouldn't have won the deal in the first place. The competitor was a better match with the buyer need. Now, I will be honest that My boss at the time was not thrilled about that outcome. But I would also argue that if you look at the cost of customer churn, well, take a look at it this way. Take a look at customer acquisition cost. Take a look in your business how long you need to keep a customer for you to break even. And then also include in it the cost of supporting a customer who's unhappy with your solution. Do that experiment in your business and run up those costs. And what you'll find is it's very inefficient to win customers you shouldn't win. Your boss may not want to hear that, and my boss didn't want to either. But the reality is, if you have the numbers that show here's the cost of customers we do well with, here's our break-even point, here's the cost, and why we lose money more often than not. For some managers and some leaders, they will get it. Some boards and some leaders will get it. Some will hate you and say, I don't care. We need to drive up our dollars in terms of revenue now, win every deal. So, and if that's the mindset of the business you're working within, then it's not a good idea to set up that competitor level deal room, because you're going to get fired every time you lose a deal. But if you work in a more mature organization that really is taking a look at their economics, get cost of acquisition, cost of support, cost of all of that, and really understand well how long it takes to break even and the value of a lifetime customer, then that's a company and a business within which this model will work well. But it's only if you're at that level of maturity and understanding. Really good question.
Thank you for that, John, and thank you for asking, Cameron. And thank you so much to everyone who's attended, and thank you, John. This has been incredibly insightful. I took a lot of notes. For anyone that's wondering, we're going to be sending the recording within 24 hours of this so that you can watch it back or share the link. So thank you so much. This has been awesome, and I hope you all have an incredible rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Sam. Thank you, everyone.